Næsti gesturinn heitir Mark Blyth. Hann skoti, prófessor í Bandaríkjunum við Brown University á Rhode Island. Hagfræðingur, þekktur fyrir mjög líflega og skemmtilega framsetningu á fræðum sínum. Welcome to Silver Ales, Mark Blyth.
Thank you.
You gave a lecture at the university which had a very elaborate title, After the Crisis, How to Tell the Forest from the Trees When You Are Not Out of the Woods Yet.
Yes.
Yes. Can you tell me what you were, what is the meaning of this?
Sure. It's partly about the way we think about the crisis. We want to think that the crisis that happened to Iceland was something that happened to Iceland. Just as the same, the Irish want to think it's something that happened to Ireland. But it also happened to England. And it also happened to a bank in Belgium that no one had ever heard of. And it happened to Lehman Brothers, and it happened all around the globe. So we concentrate on the trees, the individual bits, without figuring out that it's part of a wood, which is part of a bigger forest. So if we really want to understand what's going on, we need to think of it as the entire system and how those moving parts come together to produce a crisis, rather than looking just for very local and very straightforward causes. The world's a big complex place, and that's what I was trying to convey, that the complexity of the system itself is what needs to be understood.
We got ourselves into this mess with debt, in a way. Everybody was piling debt upon debt. The people, the banks, the governments, and we are trying to get out of it with austerity. And this is something you are very critical of.
Yes.
This way, the austerity. You even talk about it as being nonsensical.
Yes. And there's two reasons for this, and if anyone can give me a good answer to why these issues are not issues, then I'll stop going on about it. So the first one is what we could call a fallacy of composition. That is, the whole is not the same as the parts that constitute it. It is bigger than that. And this is, again, the forest and the wood and the trees analogy. So imagine a situation whereby you have a small village, and the village decides that they're in debt. So everyone decides to stop spending in the village. That's going to be bad in the village, but the town next door isn't doing the same thing. And in fact, if the village is saving money, that actually might be good, because when they clear up their debts, they might go to the town and then do more shopping. But what happens if the village and the town and the city and the country and everyone else all decides to do the same thing at once? The only possible thing that can happen is that you will shrink the economy. The second thing is this one. And this is a line that I like to use to describe this. The phrase which we have for austerity often is, we need to tighten our belts.
Yes.
Well, I'm in favour of that 100%, the minute we're all wearing the same pants. And it's manifestly obvious that we're not wearing the same pants, that single mothers, that the unemployed, that workers are not the people who benefited from this huge financial, levered, risky bubble. Yet somehow they're the ones that are supposed to pay for it. Well, there's a word for that. It's called class politics, and it usually ends badly.
So it's the lower classes that suffer from austerity most.
They must, because I don't want to use the terms lower classes, upper classes. Think about this as a problem across an income distribution, from those who earn very little to those who earn a great deal. Those at the top end of this income distribution don't consume government services, particularly where I live in the United States. Particularly in the United States, they send their children to private schools, to private universities, to be educated by people like me. So the bits that get cut are the things that they rely upon. And the people who take the cuts are the teachers, the doctors, the firemen, who serve those communities which are low income to begin with. So there is an asymmetry in terms of who creates the risk and then who has to cover the risk. And that's fundamentally unfair.
But everybody is doing austerity now. It's all over Europe. And in the UK, austerity
Absolutely.
is
the number one thing.
In the UK and in Iceland. Yeah.
And you know, when you were a teenager and your mother said to you, would you jump off a cliff if all your friends did? The same logic applies. Because it's individually rational in one case, doesn't mean it's individually rational if everyone does it. Think about it this way. Germany wants everyone in Europe to be more like Germany, to be a bit more austere, to save, to export more. We can't all export at once. Someone has to be importing. Just as the same as we can't all save at once. Because if we do, you end up with a lack of investment and a lack of consumption, which then makes you save more because you're worried about the future, which depresses the prospects of growth even further. What's individually rational can sometimes be collectively disastrous.
But then, for example, George Osborne in the UK, is he wrong about what he's doing? Is he doing the wrong things?
Yes. Quite frankly, he's doing the wrong things. The idea is that there's a big thing out there called the bond market. And the bond market got a fright during the banking crisis. So follow me through this one, if you will. So there's a bunch of corporations, and we think that they're doing really well, and they can control all the risks. And we don't really notice that they are, in Iceland's case at one point, 1,000% of GDP. This is uncoverable risk. It goes bang. Well, what do? You go back to the government, and it ends up on the balance sheet of the state. And the state says, oh, great, what are we going to do with this? Well, we'd like the banks to pay for it, but they don't have any money. So then out here you've got these people called sovereign bondholders, and they're the ones who already have your debt when it was at a manageable level. But now you've caught all of this debt as well, your debt's no longer at what seems to be a manageable level. So these guys start to say, I need more interest from you in order to hold this. So now the state says, okay, I can't get these guys to pay for it. We've got a bigger deficit, a bigger debt, and they want more interest payments. What are we going to do? Well, who's the only people with any money left? That's the taxpayers. So then you turn to the taxpayers and start squeezing them, even though they had nothing to do with creating the damage in the first place. Now, eventually, and we see this yesterday in Portugal, and we saw this in Ireland as well, someone's going to turn around and say, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to vote for someone who says no more austerity. And then at that point, the bondholders go, we're getting out of your assets. We're going to dump your bonds. What Osborne was afraid of was that Britain would go the way of Greece. Britain's not Greece.
No.
Greece is Greece. Iceland isn't Greece. Your net debt position is 72% of GDP. People should remember that in the 1950s, Britain was carrying 200% of GDP as debt when it went through its golden era after World War II. Things are a little bit more complex than we like to let on. What Osborne's doing is something we need to remember. It's called politics. You don't like the state, you're a conservative, you've been trying for years to get rid of it. What a golden opportunity.
So it's political agenda?
Of course it's political.
But they are doing the same thing in Iceland. They're slashing everything in Iceland.
In Iceland, you have more legitimate concerns given the size of the economy and the exposure of the banks that you built up. Britain has 65 million taxpayers as a backstop as opposed to 300,000. You guys are more open and more vulnerable, and you have to be more careful and prudential about what you do, particularly when it comes to spooking bondholders. You are not Britain. Britain is not you. Different dynamics across. So the idea that we're all in the same boat is like we're all wearing the same trousers. It's just not true.
Iceland is now, well, we suffered a terrible shock in a way. One of the main reasons was that the banks just grew and they became so much bigger than our economy, and then they just collapsed. They collapsed on top of us. Now we're 2.5 years from there, and we are still suffering from the aftermath in different ways. For example, we have currency controls, a feature that's being debated these days. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm neither a fan of them nor someone who thinks that they will lead to the death of the nation. They're useful instruments. They've been used at history at different points, and they have, let's say, declining utility over time. If you're a small open economy, and you have the good demographics that Iceland does, and you have high skills, and you have natural resources and all the things that Iceland's got going for it, you don't want to sit behind controls forever. But here's the risk involved. If you hadn't have put up controls, given the leverage in the system and given the bad assets on the bank's books, anyone holding local currency assets, had they been able to, would have turned around and dumped them. And if they did, that would have caused a catastrophic fall in the exchange rate. You're already down 50%. Imagine it much worse than this. And then the only way you can keep money in the country is by having really high interest rates, which would push the economy down even more. So the risk at that point, and going forward, until the banks clean their balance sheets and restore some profitability, because ultimately it's their mess and they need to clean it up, which is why you're going through this whole process of the old banks and the new banks and the new banks buying the old banks. Eventually the idea is you've got to clean your balance sheets, you've got to dig your own way out of this. But if you do this with free capital movements at the moment, there's a more than 0% probability that when you do that, all the money flies out all at once. So on the one hand, I understand why you have companies in Iceland who are complaining about this and threatening to move. Because they're saying, well, you know, it's difficult for us, we have international operations, international staff, etc. And this is a real risk and it absolutely has to be addressed. There are ways of doing this. But if we make it clear that this is a series of short-term steps that will last for a couple of years perhaps, in order to give us the breathing room to work out this problem, then going forward, you can get rid of these things. But if you do it all at once, there's that risk that you make the condition worse. The old phrase is the operation was a success, but the patient is dead.
Yeah.
You don't want to get into that situation, and that's the risk with the immediate removal of capital controls. But in the long run, absolutely, they should go.
Of course, the euro is trading for 230 kroner on the abroad, so there's a huge difference between what it's trading for in Iceland.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.